Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. I am a tabletop game designer. A lover of history, and a lifelong player of Age of Empires. And in this series, Theorycrafting, I take civilizations not yet present in Age of Empires 2 and take my best stab at designing them for the game as we know it now. In today's episode, we're going back to this little old pole you see on the screen. And after the Egyptians, which I covered last week, there is another civilization that comes in second on this particular poll. We're going to be once again returning to my good friend Desert Monk, who left an excellent suggestion in the comments section of my Dutch video. This is the second Desert Monk suggestion this week, which is totally a coincidence and definitely not blatant favoritism to one of my first and greatest commenter friends. And so, without further ado, today I present to you the Moravians. These would be part of a further split of the current Slav civilization. I know that there are already a couple of new Slavic civilizations added to the game since they were introduced way back in Forgotten, but I, for one, believe that the Slavs are still way too broad of an umbrella and can be further subdivided. Additionally, of course, the Moravians have some similarities to the Bohemians. If you'd like any disclaimers or details on my philosophy as a game designer, take a look at the screen right now. A quick disclaimer, I am still getting over a sickness, so if my voice sounds a bit like a turd, that is why. And as always, a link to a comprehensive civilization document with all of the details about this build can be found down in the description below, including all of my sources. With that being said, let's get started with the Moravians. But before we get to the history, a bit of a preamble. This is something I myself needed to do a little bit of research and clarification on myself, namely the difference between Moravians and Bohemians. Now, both Moravians and Bohemians draw connections back to what is now modern Czechia, as well as in the case of Moravians, a bit of Slovakia. This does not, however, mean that they are by any means the same people. Not only did the Moravians have plenty of pieces in surrounding countries, but their bases of power within what is now Czechia were also distinctly different. The Moravians had the city of Brno as their hub, whereas Prague was undeniably the hub of Bohemia. And Bohemia in general was a much more urbanized, modern power in what is now Czechia, whereas Moravia reached its height in the Dark Ages, in the earlier Middle Ages. And therefore, I thought it would be cool to represent the Moravians in this build as a much earlier Slavic power. Frankly, one of the first examples of a true Slavic empire that the world ever knew. And they also held a much different territory than what Bohemia later would. In this respect, you can see Moravians as being kind of an early Czech power, as well as, again, a bit of Slovak. Though that is not at all to say that the Moravian identity is not still going strong today. And so even if my build of the Moravians is meant to kind of represent early Western Slavs, whereas the Bohemians are kind of representing more later urbanized Czechs, they are both still discrete identities that hold fixtures in the modern world today. Another consideration were the Silesian peoples, who I knew nothing about before beginning this project. The Silesians had their hub around what is now Opava, and had much more Polish influence, even though they still had pieces of modern Czechia to their name. They could maybe even merit their own civilization, frankly, although I could definitely see you just representing them as the Poles or Bohemians or whatever you want in a campaign context. But what do you guys think? Do you think you want to see Silesians sometime down the line? I'm a little bit mixed on it myself. And with that little sidebar out of the way, a clarification of what I mean when I'm saying Moravian versus Bohemian versus Slav versus Silesian versus everything else in the world, as we will shortly see, let's move on to Moravian history. So, when we're talking Moravian history, we can date it all the way back to the beginning of the AoE2 relevant time frame in about 400 AD. Reason being is what is now modern Czechia was colonized by a number of different peoples at the beginning of the AoE2 relevant timeframe. There were indigenous Celtic peoples living there from well before the turn of the millennium, and they were shortly joined thereafter by members of the Great Germanic migrations. Gothic peoples, Lombard peoples, take a look at my build on them up here if you'd like. But these peoples would quickly become dominated by an early Slavic upper class, which tended to rule over them during these early days. And they in turn were ruled over, or at least managed, by the Romans, the Western Romans specifically, who took them on as a federati people, giving them some access to the empire and the resources that they needed in order to become relatively thriving, relatively autonomous kingdoms. All this would change, however, when a certain horsey someone started riding his way through Europe. Attila, as he is wont to do, left an absolute wake of destruction en route to the Roman Empire and absolutely smashed any semblance of stability in the Czechia region. And what this meant is, even once Attila went through, he left plenty of other nomadic peoples in his wake to settle the lands that he had smashed. The Avars settled in Czechia, quickly asserting dominance over the relatively fractured peoples and their relatively weak Slavic leaderships. And this hegemony was relatively uncontested for several hundred years until the early Proto-Slavic kingdoms rebelled against the Avars. This rebellion was largely credited to one man named Samo, who we will talk about a little bit later. And he, confederating a group of Gothic, Celtic, and Slavic allies, fought against the Avars and actually managed to secure a kingdom and empire of his own, with the fellow Slavic Wends being some of his closest allies. Now, this short-lived empire did not last very long, but it did show that the Avars were not insurmountable. So even once the Avars kind of reasserted their dominance, they didn't have as secure a hold on the region as they did before, and they kind of traded it between themselves and the Frankish empires until about the 800s AD. When I say Frankish empires, remember that that's not just the Franks as we know them in-game. There were many Frankish empires, and they were very, very powerful and influential. So just whenever I say Franks, assume I mean like anyone west of Czechia who was part of the greater Frankish empires until like 1000 AD. Anyways, so Czechia is being traded around back and forth over a couple hundred years, but this would all change in 830 AD when the Principality of Nitra, in what is now Austria, was assimilated by a local Slavic noble, and what we now know as Greater Moravia first started to take shape, and was able to not only throw off the former Avar yoke once and for all, but was actually able to hold its own versus the might of the Eastern Franks, which is no small feat in those days. One of the ways they did this is they formed a coalition of other Slavic peoples in the region, all of whom wanted to resist Frankish influence, and they kept them west, with the Moravians being pretty much the front line of this greater defense movement. Additionally, Moravia even courted the Byzantines down south, who wanted to assert the influence of their Eastern Orthodox Church. Not only did this mean that the church was then brought into Greater Moravia, it was also how the Cyrillic language was formed as the official religious language of the Eastern Orthodox Church, which would then get promulgated among the greater Slavic peoples as a whole. And this was accomplished through a couple of Byzantine missionaries who went up into Greater Moravia as part of a larger missionary trip throughout Eastern Europe. So, in summary, though faced with insurmountable odds with powerful empires on both sides, Moravia seriously held its own, managing to thwart Frankish attempts on their independence on many, many different occasions over the centuries. Now, that isn't to say they were completely without issue. In fact, there were many issues. You know who's an issue? The Magyars are an issue. It took them only a couple decades to bring down Greater Moravia, causing it to become a shadow of its former glory and eventually start to be traded between powers once again. The Magyars didn't control it forever. Not too long after, the Franks reasserted their dominance, and then when they kind of became the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire took de facto control of what was formerly Greater Moravia. Now, that's not to say that the Moravian identity was dead. They were still a very strong player within the region, even as Bohemia started to become the more recognized Czech power, so to speak. Moravia, along with Bohemia and Silesia, formed almost a Great Britain within the Greater Holy Roman Empire of pretty much autonomous semi-countries. They were even recognized as their own countries by the Holy Roman Empire at one point, even though they still had to pay fealty and work alongside the greater empire. But once again, trouble loomed in the east in 1242, when the Mongols swept through, much like the Huns had 800 years before. They destroyed everything once again, but this time when Moravia rebuilt, it came back with a bang, transforming itself into one of the foremost industry centers in all of Europe. The city of Brno itself was known for incredible ironworks and extensive mines, and its wealth began to rival even that of Bohemia and Prague. Bohemia really took over the region in about 1310, effectively assimilating Moravia and Silesia, or much of both of them, into its larger body. But even after Bohemia took over, Moravian identity remained very strong within the south and eastern regions of what is now Czechia. And even while Bohemia lingered, the Moravian people within it remained firm in their loyalties to their roots for many, many centuries thereafter. Nowadays, Moravians are a proud and prominent culture within Greater Czechia, as well as bits of Slovakia after the countries separated. And though they do not have a country or empire of their own, they still hold the proud distinction of forming the first Slavic empires that the world ever knew. And with that, we come to the end of Moravian history. Let's move on to some of the flavor I've designed for this civilization. The architecture would be Eastern European, surprising no one, with unique skins for towers, all towers, as well as the castle. Defenses were a huge part of Moravia, as we will shortly see, so I felt like something like towers or walls would be important, and walls felt a little bit weird to give a unique skin to. Their language would be Western Proto-Slavic, Dobrudini, ladies and gentlemen. This might be a tough one to research, but they certainly didn't speak any modern Slavic language, and fortunately, Western Proto-Slavic is fairly well documented, so I believe it would be possible to have compelling voice lines that are historically accurate being made for this particular civilization. Their wonder would be Divine Castle. On the left, you can see what it looks like now. On the right, an artist's reinterpretation. It's this beautiful soaring building on these great cliffs with a big wall reaching all the way down to the water below. I think it looks spectacular. It's a great representation of the kind of defensive fort-building identity that the Moravians had, even if we don't have a perfect representation of what it actually looked like. Moving on to the campaigns. There were a number of great Moravian heroes that I thought would be pretty good candidates, but let's start with the first obvious one, Samo the Great. Samo was an incredibly interesting guy. Again, he came to power when the Avars ruled back in the 600s AD. He himself was a Frank, again, not French, and he worked as a merchant in the region for decades before kind of finding himself at the center of this coalition of peoples trying to resist the Avars and purge the region of bandits that had been plaguing them for centuries at this point. So he was a very charismatic man, known as the Lord of the Road by the peoples who followed him, and actually managed to establish, almost single-handedly, a very serviceable empire that lasted until his death. It was even just called Samo's Empire. And while his legacy didn't quite last, because the powers that he was fighting off quickly took advantage as soon as he died, he was able to hold back some of the greatest powers in the region single-handedly off for a little while. There'd be great civ diversity when you were playing a Samo-based campaign. So I think he'd be a great fit, but moving ahead a couple hundred years, let's look at Saint Rastislav. Rastislav was one of the earliest rulers of Greater Moravia, and he inherited the position during a time of massive tension with the Frankish powers. He was the main one who formed the coalition against the Franks and courted the Byzantines to enlist their aid in securing Moravian autonomy as well. One of the reasons he's remembered by the moniker Saint Rastislav is he was the main one who brought Eastern Orthodoxy to Greater Moravia, casting off their former pagan identity in order to adopt the Cyrillic alphabet and Christianity more broadly. He revolutionized the way the country was run, and so while a lot of his campaign would be about diplomacy, I still think he could be a very compelling and interesting protagonist to play as. His nephew, however, might be an even better pick, Svatopluk I. Svatopluk is largely considered the single greatest leader in Moravian history. Not only did he usurp his uncle Saint Rastislav with the help of the Franks then betrayed him, and he then broke himself out of Frankish confines to lead a rebellion against the Franks that eventually led to him being installed as the Moravian king. And under Svatopluk, the Moravian borders spread more than they ever had before. He owned from the Baltic Sea all the way down to the Adriatic Sea, like this belt of land that created a completely impassable border for the Franks. Svatopluk's campaign would be one of expansion and defense in turn. On one side, defending against Frankish incursions, and on the other side, launching lightning raids to expand your own territory and build new fortresses to secure your claims. I think his campaign would be dynamic and exciting, and in my opinion, he is the best pick for a Moravian campaign protagonist. Now, in terms of existing campaigns, there are unfortunately not too many where the Moravians would fit. You could arguably stick them in the Dracula or Ivailo or Khao Tian Khan campaigns to sub out what are now Slavs, but I don't think that they necessarily would be incredibly historically accurate fits, and you'd mostly be doing it to add some variety. The only place I think they'd be a perfect fit is the Honfoglalas campaign, where one of the enemies you face is actually representing Greater Moravia at the time, and I think they'd be a great final enemy to face, especially if you gave them time to build up their defenses. So, in terms of other campaign ideas, there are a few other protagonists that I thought were worth mentioning in this presentation. The first being Moimir I. He was the man who actually founded Greater Moravia. He had some very intense battles against the Franks, but he didn't really have the civ diversity and strategic diversity of some of the other Greater Moravian leaders, so I thought that he might not be quite as compelling of a protagonist. And second of all, Ottokar the Great. This fellow was one of the great Bohemian kings who came to power after the Mongols swept through, but he actually started as a leader of Moravia, and later on gained power over Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia as a whole. He was the one who spearheaded Moravia being transformed into an industrial power in the wake of the Mongol rampage. And because of that, I think it could be pretty cool if he could represent Moravia during its later economic boom, and maybe even be like a dual Moravian-Bohemian campaign where you play Moravians in the first couple and Bohemians later to kind of represent the transfer of power between the two great peoples. So, an interesting thought, but not as clean a representation of Moravia as a whole as some of the other protagonists on this list. And with that, let's wrap up this history section with the major themes that I determined while reading through Moravian history. The first one being fortresses. These guys built fortresses like it was going out of style. They built so many, mostly wooden, but not solely wooden, and used them to secure their borders, both during their territorial expansions, as well as against their many, many enemies. These fortresses were remarkably intricate for the era. They incorporated a lot of building elements that weren't normally seen at the time and wouldn't really become popularized till later in the Middle Ages. The positioning of these fortresses actually laid the groundwork for many cities later in the region. And so if you're in Czechia or Slovakia, there's a pretty decent chance that you're not too far away from a town or village that was founded around an old fortress. Now, the second major theme I determined is the weathering of sieges. The Moravians were considered unsiegeable by many peoples. Even the Magyars, who eventually defeated them, didn't even try to attack them directly, instead using horse raids and starvation tactics to attrition them down over time. The Moravians even trained these special repair squads that would go out and rebuild their fortifications mid-siege using pre-planned tactics and stashes of resources to make sure they could do so consistently and safely. And so these guys were absolutely built for a defensive playstyle. The third of the major themes I determined was what I'm calling counterpunch warfare. One of the sources that I read talked about this pretty extensively, how the Moravians would almost never be the ones to throw the first punch in a fight. Instead, they would take enemy attacks, weather them down, wear them down, and then slam back with a massive cavalry sortie. And after that sortie drove the enemies away, they'd press their advantage, take some land, build new fortresses, and then wait for the next attack so they could do the whole thing over again. Not only is this, I think, a really distinctive strategic playstyle for a civilization, it really helps establish a defensive and cavalry-based identity, which is not something we have in the game yet, and I think would lend itself to some very interesting gameplay situations. And with all that, we come to the end of the history section. Thank you so much for watching. If this was all you were here for, please make sure to like and subscribe before you leave. For everyone else who, like me, loves Age of Empires and wants to see what I have done with the Moravians as a civilization, let's move on to the game mechanics. Beginning with some necessary updates. My Moravians build comes with a proposed overhaul for many Slavic civilizations, specifically in the realm of regional units. Let's start with a regional building, the Gord. Now, what is a Gord? It's kind of a weird word. These were one of the many types of fortifications built by Slavic peoples, especially during the earlier parts of their history. The term Gord can still be seen in place names like Grad and Gorod and things like that, and it roughly means castle or fortress. Now, Gords in-game would serve almost the role of a current krepost, but they are buildable in Feudal Age, allowing Slavic civilizations to establish strong defensive footholds very, very early in the game. Unlike castles or towers, however, a Gord can only be made in the line of sight of an existing town center, castle, or another Gord, preventing you from using it to plop right on top of your opponents and forcing it into a more distinctly defensive identity. Now, not only is the Gord able to shoot like a krepost, but they are also able to train and upgrade the Druzhnik line as well as petards. What are Druzhniks? Well, I'll get to that in a second. Let's finish up the Gord first. The Gord costs 100 wood and 200 stone and is much quicker to make than other big fortifications like town centers and castles. In Feudal Age, it would take quite a while, but the build time goes down substantially as you advanced ages. On to the Druzhnik. This is the second Slavic regional unit. This would be a very powerful infantry unit that is trained either at the Gord or the castle from Feudal or Castle Age on, respectively. Now, when I say Druzhniks are strong, they would be exceptional in Feudal Age. They could dominate almost any other unit 1 versus 1 and don't have many counters. However, unlike other units, Druzhniks would have a cap on how many you could make. My current cap is 3 in Feudal Age, with 10 in Imperial until you upgrade them, meaning that you really have to make use of your Druzhniks intelligently. They're extremely powerful, but they can't be everywhere at once. What you're getting in return, though, are some truly terrifying stats. The Druzhnik upgrades to the Boyar Scion in Castle Age and the Boyar in Imperial Age, and once you get them to the Boyar, they'll have stats fairly comparable to a current Boyar, though infantrymen, and far, far cheaper. Though they are infantrymen, they are able to mount up at a stable if you right-click on it. This incurs an additional cost, but will transform the Boyar into a cavalry unit, gaining a little more HP and a good deal more speed, but obviously becoming susceptible to anti-cavalry damage. This can be done as early as Feudal Age, allowing you to convert these powerful units to even more mobile and powerful but counterable units for an additional cost if you want. And as you can see from their low price tag, they are incredibly scary in situations where you can mass them up. And by upgrading them to Boyar, Scion, and Boyar, it does slightly increase the maximum cap that you are allowed to have on the field at any given time. And so, from what you can see of my 2 regional units here, I am trying to push Slavic civilizations towards a more generally defensive playstyle that allows them to make use of these powerful contingents of hyper-elite infantry/cavalry, which is very reflective of how they actually tended to function, with the Moravians representing some of the earliest examples of these quintessentially Slavic strategies. So, who would gain access to these units of existing civilizations? Well, it would be the Bulgarians in full. The krepost could maybe work like a unique upgrade to the Gord for them. The Poles, though their Druzhniks would be substantially weaker than other civilizations, and of course the current Slavs, though I do intend on splitting them further. Of note, the Lithuanians and the Magyars would not have access to any of these regional units, though I will say the Magyar Hussar unit might need an update. You'll see why in a moment. Let's move on to an overview of the Moravian civilization. The Moravians, a defensive and cavalry civilization. First bonus, 33% of all fortification stone cost is replaced with wood. Now this is obviously me stealing the current Slav technology detonets. Since I intend on fully splitting the current Slav civilization, we wouldn't have to worry about both of those things existing in the game at the same time. And unlike detonets, this is available much earlier in the game and applies to all stone fortifications. Not town centers, but everything else that costs stone, meaning that you can get a lot of benefit out of this very precious resource. Second bonus, ungarrisoned cavalry gained 33% more speed and +1/+1 armor for 15 seconds. Cavalry are also able to garrison in towers and town centers, unlike usual. This is my attempt at representing Moravian counterpunch warfare. You hole up with your guys in a defensive building, and then you slam out with cavalry once the enemy looks like they're in a vulnerable position. This will allow Moravian cavalry to be unbelievably fast and powerful, but comes at the expense of substantially higher micro resources. So you won't be able to make use of this bonus constantly, but when you do make use of it, you have just an unbelievably effective strike team that you can fling at your opponents when needed. Third bonus, buildings take 20% less damage from siege units, and units take 10% less damage from all siege units. So as I mentioned, the Moravians were considered largely unsiegeable by pretty much all of their contemporaries. So not only does this make their buildings a lot harder to deal with for things like trebuchets and siege rams, but it also means that their archers, for example, are more likely to survive a mangonel shot in Castle Age. And that can really swing a fight if you get lucky. It also means that they will almost always win trebuchet wars, since their trebs will take less damage, and their castles will take less damage as well. Fourth bonus, their blacksmiths can be crewed by a single villager who starts to hammer away on that external anvil, reducing the cost and research time of that blacksmith's technologies, and improving nearby mining. Obviously, when Moravia rebuilt, it became an incredibly powerful industrial power, and this was due in large part to the enormous mines that were set up in Moravia, as well as the extensive ironworks that were built largely by Ottokar the Great. This is an interesting economy bonus in that it does require a villager to make use of, but not only does it give you almost Spanish-like blacksmith discounts of up to 50% off all blacksmith technologies in Imperial Age, but it can improve mining to the point where it outstrips both the Korean and Turk bonuses, only within the line of sight of the blacksmith, however. So, similar to the ungarrisoning bonus, this bonus requires higher micro and higher attention to your economy than normal, but if you can manage it properly, you can get enormous benefit at the expense of a little bit of additional villager work time. Lastly, team bonus. All melee units across all teams, and this includes things like villagers, deal bonus damage to siege scaling by age. Not only does this fit into the whole unsiegeable theme that you see going on with the Moravians, but it will really make the difference in situations like sniping mangonels or using villagers to deter battering rams coming for a town center. Not the sort of team bonus I think is going to make a massive difference in every game, but I do think it will give you corner case advantages that will start to add up over time if you're catering your playstyle towards it. And now let's move on to unique units. Or unique unit. They only have one. Shocking, I know, Robbie only making one unique unit. It is called the Vitezdi. It is a axe-wielding cavalryman whose name roughly cognates to the word victor or victorious, but is often used in the context of riders in the time of Greater Moravia. The Vitezdi would be a heavily armored cavalryman, but is very cheap compared to something like a knight, costing like 75 food, 35 gold. It doesn't have fantastic damage, but its defenses are comparable to the Knight line, and it even has an attack bonus versus siege, hence why I feel like the Magyar Hussar unit might need to be changed to give a different identity so there aren't too many anti-siege cavalry going around. Additionally, the Vitezdi has a special ability where it gets greater armor as its health drops. So once you hit like 66% health, it gets +1/+1 armor. 33% health, another +1/+1 armor. And when you hit elite upgrade, these thresholds become tighter, so you get greater benefit overall. This couples well with the Vitezdi's second ability, where it heals faster while it is garrisoned, and I do mean a good deal faster. This means that the Vitezdi is a perfect candidate for the ungarrisoning strategy the Moravians are trying to go for. You send them out, they fight off the enemy, they barely survive because of their bonus armor, and then they make it back to a building, heal up, and repeat the process. Do I think the gameplay loop will play out that way every time? No, definitely not, but for the price tag, it's a pretty good amount of value to get out of a unit. Beyond this unique unit, the Moravians' Castle Age unique technology is called Zupans. The Zupan was the name for like a regional administrator, one of the main jobs of whom was procuring cavalrymen in times of war. This term Zupan is pretty common among Western Slavic peoples even today. And the technology would give heavy cavalry plus 20 HP and make the ungarrisoning bonus last 100% longer for them. Now, not only does this give the Moravians some of the tankiest knights in the game, but it also gives them some of the fastest. If you can consistently make use of that ungarrisoning bonus, your knights will be absolutely zooming over the map. And in addition to the knight line, This ability applies both to the Vitezdi and the unique Družnik unit when they are mounted up, as both of those do count as heavy cavalry. This doesn't, of course, apply to your Hussars, who will still be very decent. They just won't get as much benefit from this side of the Moravians' identity. The Imperial Age unique technology is Glagolitic Script. This allows you to benefit from other players' monastery technologies and relics, as well as increasing conversion resistance. Eastern Orthodoxy was adopted by Greater Moravia largely to counter the efforts of Catholic Frankish missionaries in the region, and they even went so far as to capitalize directly upon the groundwork laid by these missionaries and just co-opt it for Eastern Orthodoxy with a greater Slavic identity built into it, rather than having the Catholic missionaries undermine their autonomy within the region. Because of this, Glagolitic Script will make it such that you can really effectively adapt to enemy monk strategies, as well as getting a little bit of extra gold trickle late game if you have decided to neglect relics while your enemy has maximized them out. That does it for the bonuses and uniques. Check out the civilization document down in the description if you want full details. Let's move on to the Moravians' tech tree. What are they good at? What are they not good at? Let's begin with infantry. They get a B. They have the champion. They have the very powerful unique Družnik line, which upgrades all the way to Boyar, but they do lack halberdier and plate mail armor. This means that their infantry is never going to be nearly as important to their army as their cavalry, and I hope makes them feel more distinct from the current Slavs with their massive focus on infantry. I will say, though, the less damage from and more damage to siege does help. Archers, also a B, but it's a weird B. You have the Arbalester, you have the heavy cavalry archer, who does benefit from your ungarrison bonus. You have Thumbring, you have Parthian tactics. That's such a good tree. But then, they miss the second archer armor upgrade. I did it again, guys. I like giving people crappy armor, what can I say? And it does make sense in the history. The Moravians did have a good archery tradition, but archers were almost universally crappily armored levies, who were still important to the army, but were never put into positions where they could take frontline damage. And because of that, I thought it helped the Moravians get a very interesting, unique archer identity, where their archers are actually very good, but also extremely vulnerable. Though I will say the less damage from siege is very, very helpful for archers, especially Castle Age crossbow play. So still use your archers as the Moravians, but don't let them take hits if you can. Cavalry, it's an A-. They have their unique Vitezdi, they have the Družnik line, which again can mount up and become cavalry units, and they have the very powerful Zupan's unique technology. What they lack, however, is husbandry, paladin, and elite step lancer. They do get the normal step lancer, which will diversify their Castle Age raiding options, but won't benefit from their Zupan's unique technology. The ungarrison and garrison bonus is really useful for cavalry, but definitely is not a normal cavalry playstyle. And while they do also get more damage to siege, I felt like the fact that they miss things like husbandry and are trying to compensate for that lack of speed with these huge bursts of speed out of garrison buildings doesn't quite mean that they merit the A, even though they have cavalry as such a focus of their identity. They just play with it differently from everyone else, which is cool, but isn't A territory in my book at least. Siege. It's a B. They have siege onager, but they don't have much else. No siege engineers, no siege ram, no bombard cannon. It's average overall. Their defenses, however, are excellent, an A in my book. While they don't have architecture or bombard cannon, they have a full university otherwise, as well as the powerful gourd. They also have just so many good defensive bonuses. The stone cost thing is huge, taking less damage from siege on their buildings, the garrisoning thing, the whole civilization is just geared around this defensive identity. I think it would be silly to give them anything less than an A, even though they miss architecture. Moving on to their economy. It's not fantastic. It's a C+. They miss two-man saw, but otherwise have all the eco upgrades, and they do have that cool blacksmith bonus. It does take more micro than other eco bonuses, though, and it's not a strict upside since you are spending villager time in order to get advantage of it. So I don't think that economy is ever going to be something the Moravians specialize in, but I think a C+ is a fair place to put it. Let's move on to the dock. It's a C-. It's not great. They are stuck with fire galleys, don't get cannon galleons, and don't get shipwright, but their galleons are perfectly acceptable, so I think a C- is fair. Moving on to monks. It's either a D- or a B+. They miss so many technologies. Almost all the monastery technologies, frankly, but they have Glagolitic Script, meaning that if your enemy is teching into monks, you get all of these benefits, plus you get double stacked benefits on things like Sanctity and Fervor that you do have access to, and so if your opponent also hits them, your monks get both effects twice. A very unusual monk tree, but something that I think could see some play if your opponent went for something like heavy monks on Arena and Castle Age. You hit Imperial Age, pick this up, and suddenly you're laughing. So I didn't think of any better way of representing that besides a split grade. That's the tech tree. Let's move on to the overall playstyle employed by the Moravians at a guess from me. Early game as the Moravians, you want to get to Castle Age. You have all these defensive benefits, but they're not necessarily going to kick in great until you get to mid-game. You can rush, you do have some decent rushing options available, and you have some marginal benefits for it from your blacksmith, but you're normally going to be in a better position turtling. A defensive gourd, if you can pull it off in Feudal Age, is huge. Like, imagine getting a Crepost in Feudal Age. The gourd is almost going to be that good. Obviously, you can't use it to drop on your opponent's base, but if you can put it in a key choke point or something, it's going to help you get to Castle Age in a big old way. Now, once you get to the mid-game as the Moravians, you're in a much better position. Your bonuses start to kick in, your heavy cavalry is online, you have Zupans, you have your Boyar Scions, you can do some serious damage come mid-game. And your archers are possible, like I said, you have Thumb Ring, but you don't have the second archer armor upgrade. So even if you do some good crossbow rating in Castle Age, you might want to cool your jets in Imperial Age and just have your archers be a backline. Now, in Castle Age, you also can maximize the benefits of your defensive network. You can throw up cheap fortifications everywhere. They'll be harder for your opponent to take down. It's so easy to castle drop as the Moravians and not be punished for it, which puts them in a great position if they have the map control ready to capitalize on that. Late game, on the other hand, is a little bit more of a mixed bag. You have a very strong front line of cavalry as the Moravians. And if you can capitalize, if possible, on your ungarrisoning bonus, then these cavalry can be terrifying to face for your opponents. That being said, your backline is very fragile, though it is high DPS. Your heavy cavalry archers can be really mobile thanks to the garrisoning bonus. You do have siege onagers, you do have arbalists with Thumb Ring. You just don't want them to ever take a hit, so you need to use your cavalry to screen for them wherever possible. And you also want to keep your homeland walled as the Moravians. You have a very, very fragile economy. Because your main eco bonus is going to leave villagers exposed, lightning raids can cause serious problems for you. And so it's best to keep your homeland as defended as possible with the Moravians so that you can focus all of your micro on the front line, getting cavalry in and out of buildings to keep their bonuses fresh, and keep your Vitezdi alive as their health drops low. With that analysis of Moravian playstyle finished, let's move on to some loose threads, ideas that didn't quite make the build, and questions left unresolved for yours truly. Again, apologies for my voice. It's starting to fade at this point. I'm going to see if I can finish the video up. Uncertainties to begin. First of all, the way I have built archers and cavalry on the civilization are very unconventional. I think people will be very suspect of archers missing 2 armor upgrades, as well as cavalry playing in this weird garrisoning and ungarrisoning playstyle, so I could see both of those elements of the civilization not being well liked. I also think that the regional Druzhnik unit might be a bit overtuned. They do an awful lot, they're very, very powerful, and the fact that it's limited just in number means that if I screwed up the breakpoints of how much is too much, they're just going to be way too strong or way too crappy. So I could see them taking a little more work to get exactly right. I do love the theming behind them, though. And lastly, they do have a lot of anti-siege bonuses. And I'm not really sure if it's too much. It's obviously very well grounded for the civilization, but siege is never the backbone of an army anyways. So having 2 bonuses that are anti-siege might just mean that they're specializing against something that's not going to happen very often. So I'll leave it up to you guys to decide whether it's too much. Tabled ideas, some things that didn't make the build. 1, I had the idea where you could crash the market really faster for everyone else by buying and selling stone. This is in reference to the fact that under Ottokar the Great, Moravia flooded Europe with so much gold that gold devalued, which is hilarious, first of all. And I think would make for a really cool economy-based playstyle. But is very specific and also might be hard to balance. Another regional unit I had was the idea of a voivod. This would be a single guy that you could make. You could only have one at a time, and he'd be a warlord that you could use in addition to your Druzhniks, and Druzhniks would be more powerful fighting near a voivod. I think this is a sick idea, but it's pretty much just adding a hero unit into the game, which is something I wish to discuss in a future video, but isn't really the sort of thing I think you can just throw out in a build and not devote more time talking to. Next, something about unique Imperial Age mining techs, like Imperial Gold Shaft mining, like a unique upgrade just for the mining technologies. That could be cool. I like the blacksmith one better, but this is another way of possibly doing it. Another one, I had a lot of ideas around blacksmith plus gold/stone mining. This one was you could use the blacksmith as like a surrogate mining camp where villagers could drop gold and stone, and you wouldn't get the resources immediately, you'd get them over time, but you would get more in total. So if you were patient, then villagers dropping at the blacksmith would give you more gold and stone overall than if you had just mined it normally. It's very cool, maybe a little too complicated, but still very cool. Yet another smith plus mining thing was the Imperial Blacksmith techs would make your gold and stone last longer. This is definitely the most random one. I was just trying to capture the ironworks in Moravia, plus their extensive mines, allowing them to have this incredibly robust mineral economy. And I tried to approach that from many different ways. Oh, geez, I had another one? Well, yeah, this was the crewing ability. That would give you a gold trickle. Trickles aren't well liked. Theorycraft kind of shows how messy they can be. And also, this would incentivize you to make like 20 blacksmiths and put a villager in each one, and that just sounds not correct to me, at least. Another idea I had was at one point I had them not get bloodlines, and the Zupan's technology would give more HP, so it was like a later powerful bloodlines only for heavy cav. I thought they were just way too weak with no bloodlines, so I decided to go with a little bit more of a traditional route. Weird for me, I know. And also some unique technologies I decided not to go with. Proglass, this would allow monks a ranged conversion on buildings, kind of an extension of the redemption technology. Cool, but I didn't want to focus too hard on monks, and I like the way that I did it right now. Just focus all of the cool monk stuff into one technology. Pohotovost, this was the name for the levies of Greater Moravia. This would make it such that your trash units cost less as you became closer to your population cap. A very cool effect, but I didn't want them to have a focus on levies at all. I like the heavy cavalry and defensive stuff a lot better. Bradatica. This was a special kind of axe that was famously used by the Moravians. This would make it so that all melee attacks rend armor, but only up to -2/-2. And each strike would rend one type randomly. Is it cool? Yes. I could see maybe replacing one of the siege bonuses I currently have for something like this. Amber Road. This was in reference to the fact that the amber trade almost always came through what would later be Moravia early in the Dark Ages. This would give you a small dividend off of map-wide gold mining and wood cutting. Very cool, very powerful. But the Amber Road happened way before the times of Greater Moravia. Like, it was starting to dry up during Samo's time, and I didn't really feel comfortable making a unique technology focused in such an early part of Moravian history rather than one that represented more of it. And another one, Poti Bil Otek. This was Samo's title, the Lord of the Road. And this would make it so that once you saw an enemy, vision of them would linger, even in the fog of war, for like 10 seconds or something. So you were way better at tracking your enemy's movements. Samo was known for his vast knowledge of the road networks and the movements of enemy bandits. And I thought this was sick. It was such a cool effect. I just didn't feel like I had room for it, and it didn't feel strong enough to justify any sort of price tag. So we'll see on this one. Could be a civilization bonus for another build down the line. And with that, we come to the end. My voice and I thank you for making it with me to the end of this Moravian build. Before we end, Likelihometer. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely do I think it is that a build, much like my build here of the Moravians, could make it into the game in future? And for the Likelihometer today, we have a 4.5 out of 10 and a very shitty drum roll. I think it's possible. I do think the Slavs will be split at some point, and when they are, I think the Moravians are a contender. Not a strong contender, but a contender, hence the 4.5. I'd love to see them. I think they'd be a great way of getting more Dark Age peoples into the game. Like, we have so many high Middle Ages and Renaissance civilizations right now. It would be nice to get more from the early Middle Ages and late antiquity, much to match things like the Goths and the Huns. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think of my build? What would you have done differently? Do you think I did a decent job of capturing the history and the feel of the Moravians, or do you think that I dropped the ball somewhere? Regardless of your opinions, I want to hear from you in the comments section down below. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and tell me what you would like to see me tackle next.
And make sure to like and subscribe.
But until we meet again, my name is Robbie Howell. And ciao for now, everyone.